Once again, we're back with a topic that a lot of married people battle with, right? There's a few questions that I want us to answer which relate to inheritance and also a marriage in community of property. Because I do see that a lot of people have confusion, concerns because of the type of marriage that they're in. So I'm going to provide clarity to some of those questions. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation. So if you're new here, my name is Yolanda Mnyengeza and I'm an attorney and a director at Mnyengeza Attorneys. And we're happy to have you here. Make sure you stick around because let me tell you, you will find very informative content right here. So let's get to it. So as you know, normally when we talk about a marriage and community of property, this is a marriage of sharing, a marriage of sharing assets, a marriage of sharing debts, a marriage of sharing everything that you have and you're building in this marriage with your spouse. And this also attains or pertains to inheritance that you're also going to receive to any other person out there, right? Obviously, this part of inheritance, amongst the other issues, is not something a lot of people are comfortable with. Why? Because some people tend to inherit family houses, right? And so they don't want them to be intertwined into the marriage that they're in, so that in the future they don't lose it as a family still. So one of the things that I often advise is that the people who are concerned and the people that are actually married in community of property is to speak to their parents to actually leave whatever it is that they are leaving to them in a will. Why is this helpful? How is it going to help you as a person who's not wanting your family house to also be a part and parcel of your marriage? So currently, what the law states is that if somebody, leaves you something without them drafting a will, and normally these are your parents, right? Because automatically you're meant to benefit from your parents. So if your parent or your parents pass away and they leave you a property or you have a shared interest in their estate, it means that whatever it is that you're going to inherit is also going to form part of your marriage. So let's say you're probably two siblings, right? So automatically you're going to get your 50% share and then your sibling is going to get their own 50% share of whatever property or properties that your parents have left behind. So automatically that 50% that you have acquired from that inheritance is also going to form part of that marriage, which means that your spouse is entitled to the other 25%, right? Because they have a shared interest in that inheritance. And this happens because your parents did not draft a will, and secondly, they then died intestate, which meant that whatever it is that you were inheriting now had to also form part of the marriage. So how is drafting a will going to help the situation? Listen here. So this is what a will does. So when whoever wants to leave you something, or automatically they know they have to leave you something because by virtue of the law you're meant to inherit, it's best they draft a will because this is what a will does for you. What happens is that in that particular will, you can include a certain clause. Your attorney who's going to be drafting that will knows how to draft this. They're going to draft a certain clause which makes it clear and states that whatever it is that you are inheriting from that particular person, right, it is not going to form part of your marriage. And by virtue of them including that particular clause, that inheritance will not form part of that marriage. Do you see how a will then comes to save the situation? Means that whatever it is that you inherit, whether it be a family home, whatever property, you are going to be the sole beneficiary. You are going to be the only person who has any interest there, irrespective of the fact that you are already married. This is where a will is actually useful, which is why I always say encourage your parents, encourage them so that they understand. When you're encouraging them, it's not a matter of you're trying to, get them to shift things around, maybe favor certain people. No, but you're doing this to ensure that there's not going to be complications in the future and you guys as a family lose your family home because of such mistakes. Let's go to the second question. Another concern, again, that a lot of people who are married in community of property has relates to extramarital children. right? So some people who are married in community of property are actually married to people who already have extramarital kids. So, and they know by virtue of the law, should that particular spouse of theirs pass away without a will, which a lot of people don't have, automatically those kids, whether they were born in or out of wedlock, they also have a right to share in their estate, which means they have a right to inherit from them. So the question I often get is, what children are we talking about here? Others have convinced themselves that these particular children definitely have to be minor children. Is that the case? So in terms of South African law, right, when we're talking about children, I know we often refer to children as, people who are under the age of 18. But in the context of inheritance, when the law states that those children have a right to inherit from their biological parent if they die intestate, it doesn't mean it's people who are under the age of 18. No. Anybody, whether they are 35 years of age, as long as they were given birth to by that particular person and that person passes away without drafting a will, those people, whether they are adult children or minor children, they have a right to inherit. This is where the problem comes in. There's often a lot of debacles when one of the spouses passes away and that particular spouse has extramarital kids, because people often believe that adult children don't have a right to inherit. Definitely wrong. You do recall that as grown as you are, your parent, when they pass away, you have a right to inherit from them. So what's the difference between a child born in or out of wedlock? There's no difference there. They are still a child. So they are also entitled to benefit from that particular spouse. So if your spouse doesn't want them to inherit, unfortunately, they're going to have to take the steps to draft a will so that those kids are excluded. But if they are not, those children have a right to share in their inheritance or their estate that they have left behind, and no one can prohibit that from happening, because that is the law. Last but not least, let's answer this question. A lot of people tend to, again, want to prohibit any extramarital kids from also forming part of the inheritance. And some of the questions that they often ask us is, forget about the will. Can we just draft a document to say that, agree on a document to say that those kids will not inherit irrespective of whether the person passes with or without a will, right? Can we at least draft something, when we're getting married, that those kids will not be entitled to even claim inheritance from the estate of that spouse? Kind of ridiculous, isn't it? It is because people don't want to share anything that their spouse had. They only want their own children in that particular marriage to benefit, but don't want extramarital kids to benefit. So they ask and try to do as much as they can to prohibit this. But to answer the question, this is not possible. There's no possibility of you drafting a document to say that if your spouse were to die without a will, those kids must not benefit. If they, as the spouse of yours who has extramarital kids, want to exclude those kids, they are the ones who have to take themselves to a practitioner's office and draft a will and make it clear. Otherwise, this cannot be an agreement that you or the both of you make when you're getting married, right? They have the right to decide how their inheritance is going to be inherited by whoever it is that they're leaving behind. So it's not for you as the other spouse or for the both of you to draft a contract when you're getting married. It's not going to work. Again, with the issue of claiming for inheritance, when this particular spouse of yours passes away, can you draft something as well to exclude those kids from actually seeking maintenance? Impossible. Remember, a parent who is still taking care of a minor child a parent who still has a child who's financially dependent, is responsible for maintaining that child. And just because they've passed away, that legal responsibility does not automatically disappear. Hence, those kids who, let's say, are extramarital, have the right to request for such maintenance from the estate of that deceased spouse. So there's nothing that you can draft that is going to change the law. First thing that you need to understand is that above anything else, the most important thing is that children's interests are always put at the forefront, and the law can never be changed or amended by any contract that you come up with. Right? So the contract you want to draft with your spouse, doesn't matter what it is, it has to be in line with the law. And this one, where you want to exclude kids from having the right or the ability to request for maintenance from an estate, will never pass, because it will be jeopardizing those children's rights, right? So do not even think that's a possibility. Instead, if you feel uncomfortable with extramarital kids benefiting, rather not get married to someone who has children. And if you have someone who has children already that you're married to, rather encourage them to go and draft a will. But obviously, in a nutshell, this cannot happen. You cannot exclude kids from claiming maintenance from the estate. You cannot draft a contract to say that when your spouse passes away, those kids can't claim. A spouse has the right to draft their own will. And if they're not drafting it, they probably have their own reasons. Right? So that brings us to the end of our discussion today. So those were the prime questions that I wanted us to answer here, because I do see that a lot of married people tend to ask these questions over and over and over again, right? And it makes sense. They're concerned about a number of things, which is why I always say that before you get married, decide what kind of marriage is going to be suitable for you, so that you don't have to end up asking such questions, which are also unlawful and not very ethical, right? So that brings us to the end of our discussion today. My name is Yolanda Myengeza, and I hope this was helpful to you. Listen, like we always say, if this was helpful, definitely share it. Give it to another person, say, have a look at it, so that they can also benefit. We're all about education, making sure that the masses are properly informed. We'll see you next time.